Hello, and welcome back to HEMA Fight Breakdowns. Today, I want to talk about half sorting, specifically its pros and cons as it pertains to a Blossfechten tournament. So, half sorting, if you don't know, is generally when you take your offhand, in this case, it's going to be the left hand, and you place it about halfway up the sword. You grab it in your hand, and then you basically hold it like a pole arm. The purpose of half sorting is generally relegated to armored fighting because holding your hand halfway up the sword and gripping it there gives you a large amount of control and leverage over the tip. And basically, what this allows you to do is it allows you to very accurately and strongly put the tip into a gap in an armored section of your opponent or an unarmored section of your opponent and just really jam it in there. So that's generally its purpose. But we see in sources and in other things that half sorting can be used in a Blossfechten circumstance. It's just that there are some more issues that you have. One being that when you're not wearing armor, your hand and your arm is extremely exposed when it's gripping the top of the sword. It's very easy to hit, and more importantly, if a blow lands in the wrong place, it's very easy for it to slide down the sword and hit you in the hand, even when it wasn't intended to do so. But that being said, we'll watch the clip and see how it's used here. So, what there is to pay attention to here is a couple of things. So, right about here, you could actually probably say a blow lands to the hands, but we're going to ignore that for the most part. Because this is a classic situation that arises whenever two people enter a grappling situation. They both let go with their offhand and they attempt to do something about their opponent's main hand. Makes perfect sense. However, in this particular instance, this fighter here, they couldn't get their right arm out of the way, and right now it's basically trapped between the two of them, with the blade sticking out over here over the top of the other person's arm. And for the next couple seconds, what each person focuses on is freeing up their sword arm, which this fencer does all the way out here, and binding their other opponent's arm, their main arm, with their offhand. But in this case, both essentially fail. As of right now, both of the sword arms are free for both people, and their non-dominant arms are basically just tangled up in each other, not really doing anything of use. So what happens at this point is that the fencer here immediately grabs their own sword, pins it to their body, because as it turns out, it's actually very hard to just grab your own sword out of the air if it's not, in control, and when it's not, or when it is in a grapple situation. And unfortunately, the fencer over here is in a bit of a weird situation, so this cut to their head actually ends up missing. But this is an important thing to talk about because this is exactly where 99% of half sorting attempts fail. The second you try to go from having two or even one hand on your sword to then moving your hand to that different part of the sword, to that half sword position, it is actually incredibly difficult to grab. It's incredibly difficult to then regain control of your weapon and put it up in a meaningfully blocked, position where you're defended. And it's extremely easy for someone with only one hand on their sword to simply throw a cheeky little cut to your arm, head, torso, leg, anything pretty much. Because the issue with half sorting is that this arm here is basically, if it's not armored, only presenting an extremely simple and easy target. But for the sake of the review, this cut misses, and we can just assume that if you get to this point in an exchange where you are in half sword and your opponent is not, what we do see here are the obvious pros of the half sword. And that is, at this point, no thrust has been landed yet, and the opponent attempts to stop the half sword with their offhand. Normally, this works great because when there is only one hand on the sword, the entire length of the sword is an extremely easy to grab leverage point. Anytime you miss a one-handed thrust with a longsword in a grapple situation, it is the easiest thing in the world to simply put your offhand even in the general direction of that weapon and prevent it from being used. You can wrap it up, you can pull it into your body, you can make it completely useless. The half sword, however, takes away this limitation. Because the other arm is here, there's a lot more structure. And what that means is that one hand is no longer sufficient for keeping that point at bay. it's too easy for this left arm to sort of nullify the force that the opponent's left arm is providing. And then the driving force, along with the hips and the shoulders that you can put into the tip through the back of the sword, basically makes it so you can't be stopped. So what do we learn from this? If you're going to try a half sword in a grapple, in Blossfechten, there are a couple things that you need to watch out for. The first is that you very, very quickly transition to half sword, and it have been, your intention to do so. Because situations where there's a bit of a scramble and everybody's just sort of fishing for whatever they can get, you're not really in a locked grapple, nothing's held down, everything's open and free. This probably isn't the best time to try to transition to half sword, because what's probably going to happen is that while you're spending your time trying to find your own blade and put it in your hand, the other person's taking a piece out of you. So what you do instead is, in situations where you're much closer, you have some sort of neutral position. Maybe both of your hands are right up in the air and neither of you are in a position to throw a cut. You try to, instead of pulling your sword arm back to free it up to deliver that cut or that pommel strike, you instead allow the bind to continue to happen, let the half sword happen, and then use your superior leverage to win that bind. The other thing to watch out for is that once you're in your half sword position, what you need to make sure of is that you're zoning out the area that is most likely to be attacked by your opponent's remaining, ability. If you're in a situation where, again, because you're half swording, you cannot control your opponent's blade arm anymore because you've given your offhand and put it on your sword, you need to make sure that whatever angle you're attacking from with your half sword takes into account the likely attack that's going to be coming from your opponent's empty hand or your opponent's sword arm in one hand. So in this particular case, I think that the fencer on the left here focuses a little bit too much on trying to land that stab, and instead they should have just sort of put up a very classic hanging parry. But again, that's one of the difficulties of half swording, because if you go into your half sword and you don't parry that first attack, it's very likely you're going to get hit. And then even in trying to parry that first attack, there's a chance that you just get hit on the hand anyway, because it's just sticking out there so far that people will almost hit it by accident. But if you can manage to get through all of those hurdles, and you can get yourself into a situation where, for whatever reason, your opponent's sword arm has either just failed to attack or zoned out for whatever reason, and they're trying to get ready to bring that next one to bear, this is your golden opportunity, because with two hands on the sword and with this amount of leverage, their offhand can do absolutely nothing to defend them, and you have them completely at your mercy. All right, that's going to be it for today. If you'd like to see your footage featured on the channel, you can send me an email at HEMAFightBreakdowns@gmail.com, and I hope to see you next time.